Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at my fourth round matchup, first game between myself and Rameshbabu Praggnanandhaa from India. Now, as always, it's a two-game match. In this match, I'm starting with the white pieces, and Prag is someone who needs no introduction. He's a very strong junior player from India, one of the rising talents. I would say he's one of the big three or big four, very specifically Gukesh, Arjun, Prag, and Nihal Sareen. So obviously a very strong player, and let's jump right into the action. So in this first game, I have the white pieces, which means I want to try and put pressure on my opponent because tomorrow I will have black. So the game starts with c4. Prag plays knight f6, I play knight c3, and now he plays c5, playing the classic symmetrical English. Here I play g3, he plays d5, I trade, and now I go bishop to g2. Now, thus far, all these moves are pretty standard, nothing too crazy, but Prag does not really play the symmetrical English, so this did take me by surprise. The game continues with knight c7, I play knight to f3, and now he plays knight c6. The idea behind retreating this knight to c7 is simple. If black were to take on c3, white can potentially claim a big white center here with the pawns on c3, d4, and e3. And when you go knight to c7, the idea is that now after knight c6, black wants to play e5, building his own big black center and having the classic Maroczy bind setup with these two pawns on e5 and c5. And down the road, after black plays e5, you can even maneuver the knight to e6 and d4 later on. So I play d3. Prag plays e5. I decide to play knight to d2 here. Now, after knight to d2, Prag plays bishop e7, and I play knight c4, trying to put pressure on this pawn on e5. It's worth noting that in this position, the knight on c6 is guarding the pawn, so I can't really attack this pawn very easily, whereas when I maneuver the knight to c4, now there's pressure on the diagonal, and the knight is targeting the pawn from a different side. So Prag castles here very quickly, and this is where I had my first decision in the game. Do I take the knight on c6 or not? To be or not to be, as William Shakespeare would say. Now, in this position, I played pretty quickly. I decided to just castle after a 2-minute think, and the reason was simple. With Prag moving so fast, I knew he was in his preparation, and when you're playing against someone who's in their preparation, you're not playing against your opponent, you're playing against Stockfish, and that sort of defeats the whole purpose of chess. So bishop takes c6 is playable, and after takes knight takes e5, white has an extra pawn, but after bishop to f6, if you take this pawn on c6, now there's some issues, I think, with bishop c3 and queen to f6, followed by bishop h3, or queen takes c3 down the road as well. So I didn't want to go into any of this for obvious reasons, which is why I decided instead to simply castle. Now here Prag plays f6, and this is where I have another difficult decision. Do I take the knight on c6 or not? Now, in my mind, since obviously I had not looked at this variation before the game, I was thinking to myself a couple of things. First of all, I was thinking after bishop takes c6, b takes c6, if I were to play a move like e4 and bishop e3, is this playable? And very specifically, if I'm not mistaken, I was thinking of a game that I actually played from the black side with a similar pawn structure against Lenny or Dominguez, all the way back, I believe in Vicon's end, something like 2009. And that game went something like e4, c5, knight f3, e6, d4 takes. a6, I believe it went bishop d3, knight f6, queen e2, queen c7, c4, g6, castles d6, something like knight c3, bishop g7, I think h3, knight c6, knight f3, knight d7, and after a move like rook d1, I believe in that game it was something like takes, castles. I don't know what his next move was, let's just say bishop e3, and after e5, it's actually quite similar because I can put this knight on c5, and I'm just going to flip the board for a second so you guys understand what I'm talking about, where if I get, say, f6, for example, and knight c5, I have these pawns on f6, e5, and d6, whereas white has these pawns on e4, c3, and c4. So now to flip the board back and jump right into the game, as you'll notice, after takes, it's kind of similar here. I don't quite have the same pawn structure, but I have these pawns on d3 and e4, and he has these pawns on c5, e5, c6. Actually, now that I think about it, it's quite similar. So let's just say bishop e6, bishop e3, say queen e8 and f3, and you'll notice I get these pawns on d3, e4, f3, the triangle, and black has c6, c5, e5, and f6. So it's somewhat similar, not quite the exact same, but I did have this in mind when I was trying to recall the pawn structure. So back to the game. After f6, I decided not to take on c6. Instead, I play f4, trying to open up two diagonals for these bishops. Prag trades on f4, I take with a bishop, and now he moves the knight to e6, and now I play this move bishop d2. Now, up to this point, Prag was playing every move pretty much instantly. So when I play bishop d2, this is a move that I felt was not the best move, but I thought if Prag is blitzing every move here, I don't want to play the standard move, which I believe is bishop to e3, because if I play bishop e3, he's going to blitz out another move or another couple of moves, and so I went bishop d2 instead. Pragg plays bishop d7, and now I play this move knight to d5, trying to trade the knight for this bishop and get these bishops. Now, the one problem that I have here is that my pawns are not super well placed in terms of trying to push them forward. So if Pragg had played a move like bishop t8, I'm not really sure what my next move would have been, because if I take the bishop on e7, after queen takes e7, if I ever go e4, now there's a weak pawn on d3. If I play e3, there's even bishop g6, targeting the pawn with rook d8 next move. And if I don't push the e-pawn, say I go bishop c3, after rook d8, let's just say queen d2, there might even be ideas like knight d4, putting a lot of pressure on this pawn on e2. And when I push, now the d3 pawn is weak as well. So Pragg played this move rook b8 after a bit of a think, and I think this is the first move that I felt was a mistake from Pragg. It did not seem like it was in the spirit of the position, because this idea of b5 I think is a little bit superficial, because my knight always has a very nice square on e3, so I don't really understand the purpose. Additionally, if you ever move this knight from e6 to, say, let's just say c7, after takes, and bishop f4, suddenly you have problems on the diagonal. So I didn't really understand this rook b8 move, and I thought it was just a little bit superficial. That being said, I didn't have an obvious plan, which is why I played this move e4 after a 4-minute think, and I was sort of channeling my inner Nepo here. When I play e4, the idea is simple. I want to overprotect this knight on d5, I want to reroute a knight to e3, and then maybe put a bishop on c3 down the road. That being said, it's very, very committal, because as we say in the game of chess, when you push pawns forward, you cannot move them backwards. So by going e4, I am forever giving up the square on d4. So Pragg plays b5, and now I take the bishop on e7, he takes with the queen, and I go knight to e3. Now, unlike the other position, I am getting a bash in here with the knight on d5, but black will have his own outpost on d4. So Pragg plays knight e4, I play knight d5, and now he goes queen d6. I play bishop f4, of course trying to put pressure on the queen and the rook. He plays knight e5, and now I make a big mistake by playing this move queen d2. Now, one thing that I will say, and I said this on the broadcast when I did an interview after the game, is that I felt like I didn't really have the flow to it. I felt like I was kind of just aimlessly drifting and playing moves. I didn't really feel like I had the thought process going. My brain just simply wasn't working. Now, on a good day, I think there's a reasonable chance that I would have found this move pawn to b4, sacrificing a pawn. Now, the reason this move is so strong is after black takes and you go queen d2, it's going to be very hard to maintain this outpost on d4. In fact, computer thinks black is already in quite a bit of trouble. Now, just to give you guys a sample line, let's say black goes a5 to guard this pawn on b4, because I am threatening to take the pawn. After a5, queen to f2, if black moves the knight to, let's say, e6, I can play d4, can't move the knight, lose the queen. After knight takes bishop, I can in between capture the knight on e5, attacking the queen, and after pawn takes pawn, and pawn takes knight, pawn takes pawn, for example, let's just say rook d1, white has an extra horse on the board and should win the game. Now, like I said, on a good day, I would have played this. Instead, I played queen d2 pretty much instantly, which is just a horrible move. As soon as I played queen d2, I was thinking to myself, wait a second, I want to go for b4, but after black plays b4, why did I do this? Because on top of taking away this pawn to b4 push, now their ideas with bishop b5, putting a lot of pressure on this pawn on d3, and I felt that I probably should have played g4 instead, with the idea of going maybe bishop g3, maybe g5, trying to use this diagonal to some effect. So instead I play queen d2, Pragg plays b4 after an 11-minute think, and already here I was not very happy. But I told myself at this point in the game, just keep playing moves, and don't blunder, and maybe you'll survive. So I played rook c1, trying to pressure the pawn on c5. The reason I played rook c1 here is that if black plays a move like a6, I can always take the knight on e5, because after queen takes, you lose the pawn on c5. And after pawn takes bishop here, black is still better, but we both have knights on d4 and d5, and I think I have some chances to save the game. So I go rook c1, and Pragg played rook c8, which I think is a bad move. Not so much because it doesn't really do anything super effective as the pawn on c5 is guarded, but because now there always are going to be tricks with knight e7 potentially down the road to fork the rook and the king. So here I play h3, trying to correct my error from earlier to go g4 and keep this bishop on this long diagonal. Pragg plays bishop b5, and now I go rook to f2, and here he plays this move king to h8, which I think is also not the best move. In this position, I have this feeling that Pragg should have played something like knight to e6 or maybe g5. It just feels like there should be something more active, whereas king h8 doesn't really do anything in particular. So here I go g4, trying to open up the diagonal for the bishop to g3 or h2. Pragg plays knight to e6, and now I play this move bishop to f1, which is a horrible move. What I should have played here was simply bishop to g3, keeping the 2 bishops on the board, because now if black tries to move like queen to a6, I can play something like g5, and it starts to get very, very complicated. And it's worth pointing out that after the game, Pragg and I did talk a little bit, and he did ask me why I didn't play bishop g3, because he mentioned on queen a6 he was worried about g5. Now, this is probably still good for black, but it gets very messy after knight takes d3, g takes f6. Let's say knight takes f2, and queen takes f2. And even though I've sacked a rook, I'm probably doing fine here, because after takes and bishop h4, suddenly the bishop and knight are coming to life. The king on h8 is a little bit weak. So I probably should have played this, but instead I played bishop f1, because in my mind, I felt that if black trades a knight for the bishop here, with the knights on d5 and e5, and this potentially weak pawn on c5, I should have pretty good chances to save the game. So Pragg plays bishop c6 here, which is not best. Probably should have gone bishop d7, bishop e6 right away. But after bishop c6, I play knight to e3, bishop d7, and now I go knight c4. And at this point, I felt pretty good about the position, because I felt that at this point, with knights coming off the board, let's just say black were to trade here, with this weak pawn that's blockaded on c5, I should never really be in danger here. One sample line would be queen takes queen, bishop e6, rook c1, bishop a2, and after rook to f5, white should be completely fine, as I will win back this pawn that I've sacrificed on a2. So Pragg plays queen e7, I play rook fc2, double stacking the rooks on the c file, trying to go after this pawn on c5. Pragg trades the knights, plays bishop e6, and now I go rook c2. Now at this point, I was already starting to feel quite optimistic, because if I can ever win this pawn on c5, I'm going to have these pawns in the center that I can push up the board. Now Pragg was very low on time here, so I felt optimistic about that as well. He plays bishop takes a2, I go queen to e3, trying to win the pawn on c5. Plays c4, which is a mistake, because now after pawn takes pawn, black has to be very careful here. If you were to play a move like a5, suddenly after b3, the queen guards the pawn, and you lose the bishop on a2 here. It's simply GG. So you have to go queen c5 or play b3. Now, if you play b3 and let's just say rook d2 and queen c5, after takes, and king f2, black is completely lost, because you end up with this bishop on a2 that is completely dead. Now, to give you guys another example, and it's funny because this is the same opponent, there was a game that I played against Lenier Dominguez in the FIDE Grand Prix in London in the year 2012. I believe it was October and November. It was out of a Spanish, but I did end up with a bishop stuck on a2 and a pawn on b3 in that game. So for anybody who wants to go back and find either of these games against Dominguez, feel free to check it out, but I did have that in my mind as well. Now, I was able to swindle a draw with a dead bishop in that game, but but with the dead bishop on a2, traditionally speaking, this should be a forced win for white. So, queen c5 played by Pragg. I trade the queens, and I go rook d2, claiming this open d-file, and maybe trying to create the kebab with rook d7. We get rook fc8, and now I play king f2. Now, after the game, I was very upset with myself, because I felt that I should have played rook d5 right away. And the reason is that if black tries to play a5, similar to the game, rook to a1 is actually close to winning, because if you go bishop c4, I trade the rooks, I go rook c1, pinning the tail on the donkey, and I win either the bishop or the rook. If black plays a move like bishop b3 here, now I can go rook takes a5, and after takes, you cannot take the pawn on c4 because of a classic ice skater on the back rank here, and your king gets stuck after rook c8 and rook takes c8, and it's GG. So I felt like I should have played rook d5 after the game. As soon as I played king f2, I kind of realized that I had probably played the wrong order, but surprisingly, this is still actually quite good for white. So Pragg plays a5 here, which is apparently a blunder. To me, I thought this was a great move after the game, specifically because if I had played rook d5, it would have stopped a5. But it actually turns out that after this move a5, black is in a lot of trouble now. So I played rook d5 here. Very simple idea. After takes, now I get the two connected pawns, and I can simply rush up the board. Pragg plays a4, and now here I play this move bishop d3, which is a big mistake. Now, I did have 3 minutes here. We are on move number 38, so it is possible I could have used my time to try to come up with a more clear-cut plan, but I felt that with Pragg having 45 seconds, even with the 30-second increment, I should try to play logical moves to keep on improving the position, which is why I played this move bishop d3. Now, the main reason I played bishop d3 was I was very concerned that if I play a move like king to e3, black can play a3, and after takes b3, there's this big threat with b2 and b1 queen, and I thought that after bishop to d3, b2, let's say rook d1, king to g8 here, I think black is maybe still a little bit worse here. Actually, maybe king g8's wrong. No, black should play g6 here. Maybe white still has some chance to win the game, but the problem is the bishop and rook are always going to have to guard this b1 square, and I simply thought that black had enough counterplay, which is why I didn't do this. But as it turns out, after b3, I can trade the rooks and play rook to d1 here, threatening the classic ice skater with rook d8. And after rook c8, stopping rook to d8, I have this beautiful move, rook to d2, which stops pawn to b2 and effectively wins the game. Because after black plays king g8, I can go rook b2, bishop simply dead here on a2. And after king f7, I can go king d4, king e6, and now I can go c5. And I'm going to play bishop c4 and bishop takes b3. Once I win this pawn on b3, I will win the game because I'm already up one pawn and I will be up two pawns. So this is a huge mistake for me not to play king e3. Again, if I had more time, I think there's a reasonable chance that I would have played it. But in my mind, when I looked at king e3, I saw a3 takes b3, bishop d3, b2, and I thought black had enough counterplay. As I said, if I had 20 minutes, I think I'd probably spot the rook d1, rook d2 idea, but alas, very difficult with only 3 minutes. So instead I play bishop d3, so now if a3 takes in b3, I can simply go rook d1 or rook to a1 here, and black can never go b2 because bishop d3 will cover the b1 square in this case. So I thought it was very logical to play bishop d3, but now after king g8, I go king e3, and rook 5 c7 is played. I go king d4, and now Pragg plays rook b8. Now apparently this is slightly inaccurate. He should have just played king to f8. But again, very hard to fault him because rook b8 makes sense too, to try and push a3, b3, b2. Some idea with b3 and a3 makes a lot of sense, and you want the rook behind the pawn on b4. So here, after a bit of a think, I decide to play this move c5, sacking the rook. Of course, if black were to capture, now I get the two connected pawns, which are simply rushing up the board once again. So I play c5, and I do think actually this is probably a critical moment. This was move number 41. If I had not used about 16 minutes on this move and I played c5 in a couple minutes instead of 16, maybe I would have been able to find better chances later on to keep the game going. At any rate, I did play c5 after a bit of a think. Pragg plays king f8 here, and now I play this move rook to f1 after a 9-minute think. Time getting a little bit low here, so I do have to be careful, and I missed perhaps the last chance to try and win the game. Now, during the game, I did see rook to a1, and I thought that after bishop to b3, if I were to play bishop c4, I thought that after takes, and rook to a7, black should have enough play with pawn to a3 next move. Now, surprisingly, computer still thinks that after b3, a3, and e5, white has some chance to win the game. I don't know if this is winning or not, but this would have kept the chances alive. So instead, I play the move rook to f1 with the idea of trying to play for g5 here and trade off the f-pawn potentially, try to open up position, do something. Now here, Pragg plays a3, which is a good move. I go rook to a1, trying to induce Pragg to take the rook again, but Pragg says no and plays bishop b3, which is the best move in the position. And now I don't really have any chance to win. I take the pawn on a3. I don't know why it says double exclam because it's an only move. Pragg plays rook to a7, and now the chances are gone because black is going to get a pass pawn on the a file here, and my c pawn is not really all that quick getting down the board either. So I play rook d6, Pragg takes, I play rook b6, and here I decide to offer a draw in view of the following variation. Rook to d8, king to c3, bishop to f7, and after c6, a2, there are a couple ways that I can draw. Probably the simplest one is to simply go bishop c4, trading off the bishops, and at some point what effectively will happen is we'll get some position like rook a8, rook b2, rook c7, or let's just say king f7, king d3, king g6, king e2, king f7, and I'll go c7 here. At some point, black will have to take the pawn, and after rook takes a2, we'll end up in an endgame where both sides have a rook and 3 pawns each. So I decided to offer the draw, and he did take it. Like I said, there's bishop c4. There's also, I think, a line which maybe I have bishop a6 here to try and complicate it still. So, I mean, I understand why Pragg did take the draw. So, overall, it's a pretty fair result, I think, from this game. There were a couple moments when Pragg was much better. There were moments where I was much better. I think really the only big miss in this game was this moment where I didn't find this king e3 with rook d1, rook d2. But again, before time control, 3 minutes on the clock, not so easy to spot. And after that, I mean, maybe there's some way for a computer could win, but to me at least, it didn't seem like there was anything really left. So I can view it as either a good result, a bad result, everything in between. It is what it is at the end of the day. So there's no need to overanalyze it. So on that note, I draw the first game against Pragg. Tomorrow, of course, will be game number 2. Pragg will have the white pieces. I will have the black pieces. And again, it's a pretty simple situation. If I draw the game, we go to tie breaks. If I win the game, I'm through to the next round. And if I lose the game, I am eliminated. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap. Make sure to hit that subscribe button below if you haven't already. And I will be back tomorrow after game number 2 in round number 4 of the FIDE World Cup here in Baku, Azerbaijan. See you guys. Bye.